Hello and welcome to the merrymitch stream. Hoping that this stream finds you in good spirits, and welcome to the Three Addict Network. I am here today to read you guys some terrific, fantastical tales. Last we left off, we were reading through a story called The Red Mother. The Red Mother is an excellent tale so far. We made it about halfway through last time. It's simply about a sorcerer who is making a pilgrimage out to find his brother, who was previously ostracized from his village and community. He finds where his brother has gone to, but it appears that his brother and his wife both have died due to the various, I think, plagues that had rushed through that part of the country. And so this person that he knows that is in the village where his brother went to told him, well, there happens to be a dragon over in that there volcano. And if you collect the dragon's venom will revive both his brother and his brother's wife. So off he goes with some bait in the form of a lame horse. And we got all the way up to the point where he found the dragon. So let's go ahead and jump back into it. This was the the little art at the start. This is The Red Mother by Elizabeth Bear. All right. I think we are all set. So, without further ado, as much as I love this song by one of my favorite artists, actually, Tennyson, I'm going to pause that and begin the ambiance. I crouched and held my hand over the smoking Ep3. I turned my face to the dragon. I was gray with ash and streaked with tears. I felt the warmth of the poison and the warmth of the ashes on which it rested, as if I held my hand over gentle coals. I've come to bargain for this. The great head tilted and drew back. The lambent eyes with their shattered planes of iridescent scarlet and vermilion blinked lazily.
I could give you more of it than you wished for, little witch.
Your presence here, your awakening of the volcano, they brought a blight upon the land. Men and women have died of illness and hunger. The cattle will die as well, if the grass is buried under ash and furnace. Or they will choke on the poisonous fumes of the volcano. I have been asked to win your Itra. I've been asked to win your Itra to bring back those who have died.
Cattle die, and kinsmen die, little witch. If they cannot live in a place, then they should go.
Look, I said bluntly. What can we give you to leave this place and not return?
What can you offer me? A fat horse is all very well, but I can fetch my own when I want one. I have commitments that will keep me in this lair.
For how long?
Not long.
Said the dragon. To my amazement, it placed first one and then the other enormous talon on the rim of the vent. Having done so, it settled its head between them, bringing its eye level down to mine. I could see the great humped shoulders, the leathery folds stretching back from its forelimbs. Like a bat's, they seemed both wing and foot to walk upon. Unlike a bat's, they shimmered with all the colors of flame. It tilted its head and rippled the taloned fingers as if counting.
Perhaps 100 seasons more.
Well, 25 years of active volcano and dragon occupation would certainly put paid to the village and all life within miles. I rose to my feet and discovered that the air was slightly better up here. Apparently the fumes were heavy. Assume for a moment that I can get you whatever you desire, I said. If you will only leave this place and give me some of your venom. The dragon curved its sinuous neck like a goose and glanced over its shoulder, back down the length of its body into the vent. I wondered if it were assessing a hoard it could not see. I wondered how anything remained unmelted down in the hot mouth of the earth. It turned back. With a sigh, it said,
I have no need for human treasures.
This obligation you mentioned, is there a way I could help you fulfill it? If you have never seen a dragon throw its head back and laugh, and I suppose very few have, it is a sight not easily described. I hastily tugged my hat down as a fine mist of caustic venom descended around me. A few invisible drops smarted on the backs of my hand.
You are not boring, little witch.
The dragon said. It looked this way and then that. To my amazement, it seemed to be making a show of casualness, of reluctance. It said, then,
Do you like riddles, little witch?
I closed my eyes. I hated riddles. I have played at riddles a time or two.
Well then,
The dragon shifted its weight, settling into the mountainside. Like a great jarl setting into his broad, bearskin-adorned chin.
come up a little closer, witch, and choose a stone to sit upon, and we can play at riddles for what you wish. But if you win, you must grant me a boon.
How under the wolf son of my fathers did I keep getting myself into situations like this? But I was a man on kin business, blood bound to do what I could. Damn my brother anyway, for being a simple farmer, for being the victim of a brutal scheme, for dying of a dragon's miasma, for getting me into all of this. I walked up to the smoking crater as if I had not a fear in the world. Certainly without any cringing as I came under the shadow of the dragon's wings. And while I was selecting a rock of the correct height for sitting, could not resist a peek over the edge into the vent. I almost fell in. I'd expected the vent to contain shining masses of gold, perhaps, seething masses of lava. Not a careful circle of boulders, each as big as a cart, and a claw-raked ground of soft ash within, like a giant's campfire ring. Upon that, dead in the center, lay 3 enormous, mottled eggs, like the last remaining embers. The dragon, it seemed, was not an it, but a she. Well, I said, I see what you mean by obligations. Have you ever heard a dragon chortle? I have, and it was in no way rendered less unsettling by the knowledge that this was a female with young. For nothing on the waters and the wide world is fiercer than a mother. I found a rock as directed, and as directed I seated myself upon it. I swung the pack with the jars down between my knees and set it gently on the stones.
So, little witch,
Said the dragon.
shall we play?
You go first, I said. Best 2 out of 3? The dragon stretched and sighed, settling itself.
I believe it is traditional. As for that boon,
As long as it's not my stringy hide. She sniffed.
I dislike the taste of woad. And I see from your forelimbs that you're bricked all over with the stuff.
I glanced down at the old and faded ropes of tattoos. They were meant to be for protection, to ensure the forbearance of the gods. First time in my life that the damn things actually worked. If you get a boon if I win, I said. I get a boon if I lose.
It can't be the same as the stakes.
She said, cagily. What forfeit will you have of me if you win? I pushed my hat back as she thought about it.
Have you a hoard?
She asked finally. I thought of gold and silver and jewels of great store. The wealth of a lifetime spent riding the railroads, reaving and trading. The price of my retirement when I found a place I wanted to retire. All safe in a vault down in Ornest, where there were bankers and banks. I thought about kin duty. I thought about my sister-in-law. Not on my person, I said.
Wager your hoard against my venom, then.
The dragon invited. Don't you even want to know how much I have? She hissed a laugh.
It's enough that it's valuable to you. That's what makes a wager interesting. That and the story that attaches to it. That someday I may say to my children, yes, this is the gold I won riddling with a sorcerer while you were yet in the shell.
It was a dragonish way of thinking, and not so alien to anybody who had gone a Viking. I touched my arm rings, fingering them until I found the one that had been a gift from Ragnar when he was a sea king and I sailed at his command. When we had been bright and young and too naive to know any better. I said, if you will wager both your venom and your leaving, I will add my adornments to the pot. Those mean more to me than any hoard. None of it was the richest that I owned, but it was enough. Earrings and arm rings, the brooch that closed my cloak, and the clasp that pinned my hair, to lend me dignity. I felt the sentiment for each object, especially since I had so recently won it all back from a murderer. At least it wasn't my coat and boots this time.
Your folks should move on, not me. This land is far more suitable for me than...
There are few things more eloquent than the dismissive flick of a dragon's talon, it turns out. That's likely true, I admitted. But you have to understand that the people of the village have built houses and barns and planted crops. Our lives are short. They won't have time or resources to up stakes and build those houses anew someplace else. She said,
There are far more suitable places for your sort to live than there are for brooding eggs. I won't be the last to come here, so long as the earth stays hot.
I can't wager for my folk any more than you can speak for yours. I hoped she wasn't a dragon queen or something, who did have the power to bargain for the whole. Anyway, the future wasn't my concern. She was right. This was a stupid place for a settlement. She huffed at the back of her throat, not hard enough to spray venom, but hard enough to cause a mist of it to curl from her nostrils and ignite into a transparent lash of flame. She tilted her head to regard me, and I got the oddest sense that her interest was more in the bargaining than the company and the game, than in who lost or won. Sitting on eggs must be extremely boring for a creature with wings to span the open skies. I'd only had the broad sails and swift rowers of a dragon boat to carry me, and although now my joints ached even in good weather, and my feet hurt every day, I could not bring myself to settle into a farmstead and raise cows. Though I was no youth to harden my muscles on an oar without injury. I could not see myself raising a hull and draping a big throne chair with wolf hides. Oh, draping a big throne chair with wolf hides and bear hides to cushion my ass and seem fierce at the same time. No matter how much the saddle galled my behind. I might have more in common with this dragon than I did with Ragnar or with my brother. Damn Arnulf.
Done.
The dragon said.
I shall begin. I am the shrill singer who rides a narrow road. With two mouths I kiss hard, the hot and pliant maidens.
I blushed, because I hadn't been expecting racy double meanings from a dragon. But I knew the answer to this one when I thought about it a little. Hammer, I said, and then smith's hammer. The road and the maidens are the metal to be forged. The mouths are the two ends of the hammer. The dragon snorted another curl of fire, slightly larger than the last one. How good was the word of a dragon, anyway? Especially when exposed to a little frustration. Perhaps I should have been surprised that the dragon knew about hammers. But the dragon knew about treasures, and steel for swords and gold for gods alike must be refined, then hammered pure. I hope there were other human things the dragon knew less about. I said, I am the black horse. On 8 legs I bear my rider. He holds no rein. At the end of the journey, it is he who is left in the stall. I am not sure dragons frown. Their scaled foreheads are not designed for furrowing. But I could not shake the sense that the dragon was frowning at me. After a while, she responded calmly.
A coffin and its bearers.
I sighed. You can't blame me for trying. The tongue flickered.
Can I not? Here is my next one. We are the old women who walk on the beach. We braid the shells and seaweed in our white hair.
Damn, I said.
Do you forfeit?
The dragon leant forward eagerly, its talons tensed as if already imagining raking through treasure. Not so fast. Not so fast. I held up a hand and tried to ignore the warmth of the dragon's breath, ruffling my hair. Unless that was just the wind of the volcano. What walks on a beach? Crabs. Birds. Waves! I said suddenly, as it came to me. The word burst from my lips before I could second-guess myself. It's waves!
Its waves.
The dragon agreed, sounding slightly disappointed. My next. Of course, because I was looking at a dragon, I could think of one riddle, only. Hoping she wouldn't be offended, I said, I am a dragon with only one wing, but of limbs I have a score. I fly to battle. I grow more fearful when I shed my scales.
Really?
I spread my hands. The rock was making my backside ache. I tried not to fidget. It would only make them seem nervous. Of course, I was nervous.
A longboat.
The dragon said. She yawned before she continued.
The limbs are the oars. The scales are the shields hung over the gunwales and retrieved when the men go to fight.
You've seen that?
I've destroyed a few. Sometimes they're full of livestock or treasure.
If dragons didn't frown, did they smile? Or had she always been as toothy as she seemed now? What do we do if it's a draw? I asked. She chuckled.
A sudden death round. By which I mean, then I eat you.
I couldn't tell if she was joking, and I didn't want to ask. It might be better to let myself lose. I could always find more treasure, after all. Never mind that it would take a desperate Viking indeed to give a birth to a man as old as me. And those were the sorts of raiders who did not come home with their ships wallowing with gold.
Last one.
The dragon said cheerfully. Did they play with their prey like cats?
A stone on the road. I saw water become bone.
How on earth did that happen? It was a metaphor, of course. Riddles always were. But what was water a metaphor for? Blood that clots? A stone was hard, and so was a sword. Brigands? Something that could stop a journey? No. No, of course not. The water wasn't a metaphor. The road was the metaphor. The whale road. The ship road. The sea. What was a stone on the sea? An iceberg, I said.
Brave little witch.
The dragon remarked. She lifted one talon and waved idly. Her opalescent eyes seemed to enlarge until I felt as if I were falling upward into them. I'm not sure how long I gaped at her, but I was startled abruptly back into my skin when she said,
Hurry up then. Let's see this done.
My mind went blank. My wit ran dry. I could think of not a single riddle. No, not true. I could think of a riddle, but it was a children's riddle, and not one worthy of a dragon. I needed something better, something clever, something I stood a chance of stumping her with. She sighed a slow trickle of flame. Damn it, I said. Fat and full-bellied, welcome and warm, I rise with joy, though my bed is hard. A loaf, of course. A loaf, puffing up and baking on a flat hearthstone before the fire. No sooner had the words left my mouth than I thought of half a dozen better ones. The onion riddle with all the dick jokes in it. Anything. Anything at all would have been better. There was the end of my chance to save my kinfolk. There was the end of my chance to put this obligation to rest. I was so engaged in flighting myself that I thought I must have missed the dragon's answer. And indeed, when I lifted my eyes again, she was staring at me quizzically. I'm sorry, I said. I didn't hear you. She snorted rather a lot of fire this time.
I said I don't know. I don't know the answer.
What? I said foolishly.
Little witch, tell me the answer.
Bread, I said. A loaf of bread. It rises when you cook it on hot stone.
Fascinating.
The tip of her tail twitched like a hunting cat's.
Fascinating. Is that where bread comes from?
She sounded genuinely excited. Dragons, it seemed, knew about death and war, but not so much about baking. Her wings folded more tightly against her sides.
Well, you've won. That's the end of the riddles then.
I have another one for you. I have another one for you, I cried, struck by inspiration now when it was too late. As a gift, no wager. The dragon definitely had facial expressions, and this one was definitely suspicion.
No wager.
None.
What do you want if you win?
Just the joy of winning, I said. Here. Alone I dwell, in a stone cell, with a grey roof. Though kept captive, none holds the key. I am not soaring above the halls of dawn. I do not see the sun rise. What creature am I? She stared, tongue flickering. Moments passed, and I worried I had misunderstood her, or worse, offended her. When she burst out,
Me! Me!
she nearly incinerated me with a spray of her venom.
It's me! Oh, sorry.
I'm fine, it's fine. I remained standing, so I could dodge faster if there were more outbursts, and to get away from the eye-watering, sinus-stinging smoke curling from the cinders where the Ep3 had fallen. The Ep3 had fallen. Unscathed. I held out my hands to demonstrate.
Good.
She said,
How odd it is that a small, frail, temporary person like yourself should make me feel so clearly seen.
well, from her point of view, I suppose I was all of those things. She had been lying along the edge of the vent, just her head and forequarters poking over. Now, with a motion that was half slither and half chinning herself, she crawled up the rim and stretched out.
Did you bring vessels?
Jars, I said, lifting the pack.
Cheeky.
What's worse? I asked. Preparing too much and not using everything, or needing a thing and not having it to hand.
You swore to grant me a boon.
She had me there. I did.
I'll give you the Hydra. You won the wager honorably. and I will leave this place and take with me my 2 children. We shall make our nest further from human habitations, though I must complain that there are more and more of you with every passing season. If you cover the whole damn landscape and keep breeding even when you encroach on other people's nesting grounds, I don't see how you can complain about a little volcano. And here I am helping resurrect your whelps, who will probably just make more of you.
They weren't my whelps, but I was more concerned with something else she'd said. I snuck a sideways glance over the rim of vent. Yes, 3 eggs. Wait, you and your 2 children.
Yes, that's the boon. Don't worry, I'll leave you plenty of Ep3 for feeding the whelp on. And I will come back every season or so to be certain the whelp is well taken care of, and replenish your supplies.
That sounded less like reassurance and more like a threat. You want me to raise a brood of your own?
Not I. A friend.
Well, if I save his children, let him care for one of mine. Oh, not I said. A friend.
Well, if I save his children, let him care for one of mine. But you, little witch, you must see that the care is good yourself.
Why me?
Because. Because I have tested your word and your mettle. And because I'm giving you the foster of my whelp. I have seen what you will do for the bonds of kinship. And because you understood me and gave me a gift, so I know you understand how bound to this boring rock I am.
But I don't want to stay here either.
One's a turning should suffice.
She said, relentless.
As I said, it's only another 100 seasons or so. The egg will hatch in 12 more seasons. Make sure your folk know that if they don't take care of my little one, though, I will come back and eat them. I will come back and eat them.
I imagined the little whelp, perhaps only as large as the horse looking up at the giant creature before me with wide, adorable eyes begging. "Mama, can I eat him?" "What about the volcano?" I asked. "My people cannot survive it. Doesn't the egg need its heat to incubate?"
A lone egg will do well enough if they bury it in dry ground near a hot spring.
She said. "Like baking a loaf of bread," I mused.
You...
She said.
and your baking.
The dragon said she would give me time to return to Ragnar's farmstead before she flew the egg down and delivered it. My backpack sloshed with jars of Ep3 as I walked. The downhill steep and full of rocks that stubbed my toes through the boot leather. I'd be lucky not to lose a nail or two. I was lucky that was all I seemed to be in danger of losing. Unless I tripped and fell and broke the jars, in which case the venom within would saturate my clothes, melt my flesh, and then probably catch on fire for good measure. I walked very carefully and kept my eyes where my feet should be going. It was a good thing, too, because the glamour I had cast on the little horse was strong enough that it even fooled me until I tripped over one of the spell-spun traces. I'd been singing to myself as I walked, songs more fitting for a warrior this time, and I had not been fingering my spindle. My hands being free of my pockets, flung out and smacked into the horse's warm flank. The glamour fell away in the face of concrete evidence, and I could see that the boulder he was dragging had gotten jammed into a crevice and was stuck there. I slipped off my extremely caustic load and set the pack down carefully before going to unwind the string from around the boulder. Then I had some extra string and a horse that was already wearing a conjure-ish harness, so it only seemed fair that the horse carry the pack. That was what horses were for, after all, among other things. I lashed it on over its withers. He was a convenient size, not so tall I had to reach up to tie things across his back. While I worked, I thought about getting back to town and explaining to Ragnar that he could have his children back. And all it would cost him was to spend his dotage babysitting a dragon. I would get out of town before my brother and his wife woke up, I decided. It would be preferable to watching their teary reunion. It would be preferable to watching their teary reunion, or having to endure either their thanks or their lack thereof. I finished my harnessing and patted the horse on the shoulder. He nickered at me under his breath friendly, or hoping for carrots. I draped an arm over his withers. He was a good height for leaning on. I made up my mind that I was taking him with me when I went. In addition to Magni, I would have to find some place easy for him to recuperate, assuming the leg could and would get better. That would mean a winter off the road, which was probably wise for a man my age anyway, even if it griped me. Anyway, I left him here. If I left him here, Ragnar would probably eat him. I felt after using him to bait a dragon, I owed him better. I scratched under his mane. He leant into me, lip twitching in pleasure. Good lad, I said. I think I'll call you Omra. Man, this was quite the story, guys. Hmm. Hmm. Yeah. Wow. There's something about dragons, you know? They're intelligent, uh, they're powerful, and yet they are curious. And honestly, I want to know more. I want to know what happens. I really wish I could see the little dragon grow up, you know? Yeah. Also, apologies. I got confused with the wording for a little bit there. Um in that small bit when he was saying that Ragnar would take care of the wormling rather than himself. Two dragons have a moody teenage period, you know? Uh that would be a question for what is his name? Yeah, Jake Long. That's a question for Jake Long. Hang on. Anybody remember this guy? There's a question for this guy right here. Dragon puberty? Oh my gosh. That would be something. Yeah, there was a full cartoon about a teenage dragon back in the day. Let's see. I freaking loved those riddles and am tempted to write them down. Um, Specifically because when I worked at Energy Kids, um, or a sorry, when I worked at a gymnasium for a time, uh, during the summer camps and such, I would often give the kids like riddles and brain teasers and such. You know, like the classic. There is a. This is a pretty simple one. A dude is trapped in a box. All he has is a pair of scissors and a piece of paper. The box is completely sealed, and it is made of obsidian, impossible to break through. The dude gets out easily. How does he do it? Um, the answer being, give you a second to think of it. Anybody know it? This one did stump the kids though, at least for a time. I think it was for a full day. One of my best ones. Um, all right. The dude takes the piece of paper, he cuts it in half. The two halves make a hole, He climbs through the hole, and he's out of there. Easy peasy. um, but yeah, I dig the bread one, especially. However, I also find it immensely impressive that the riddles match with the times, you know? I am the shrill singer who rides a narrow road. With two mouths I kiss hard, the hot and pliant maidens. It's got maidens. Do people still use shrill? I am the black horse. On 8 legs I bear my rider. He holds no rein. At the end of the journey, it is he who is left in the stall. Yeah, I like that one. A coffin and its bearers. Hey, you remember that one? I know, right? It's a classic, honestly. We are the old women who walk on the bench, on the beach. We braid the shells and seaweed in our white hair. This one's pretty clever. Hmm. Also, I wonder if the dragon would have actually eaten him. The other thing that I wanted to mention was I I wasn't sure uh if the story was leading into a an epic battle between a sorcerer and a dragon, or if it was leading into this sort of thing. I think I was more leaning towards uh, the idea that it was going to be a battle. um, but I thought it was going to be a battle of wits, not like this though. I thought he was going to come up with a clever trap, you know, like a clever way of writing glyphs and preparing traps, and you know would take the dragon down in a mm, mildly underhanded way. um, and then he would get the horde, would get the venom, would raise the dead, and it would be a big hoorah. But I like this. This outcome was I think a lot better than that. Yeah, I was expecting a battle. Dragons and Vikings, always a good combo. And a desire to uh or a quest for kinsmen or kin duty. Apparently Vikings and such, and uh like the Nordic people were pretty keen on staying um on staying true to your family. I like that. The oh, good lad. The also the interactions between him and the lame horse who got named at the end. Ormra. 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 Was pretty sweet. Like Vin Diesel. Oh, it's kind of a letdown. Yeah, I'd be interested in reading a longer story set in this verse, though. Absolutely. That's what I was thinking. The way this person writes is uh pretty darn enthralling. I've also never seen so many uses of the dash in between like this. It did trip me up a bit um on occasion because I would be reading through it and I would see dotted with burnt, and then I would see the dash as like, okay, need to pause. Dotted with burnt, orange or gray, green licking. and and it would only be once I got to the end of the sentence that I would be like, oh, nah, these are simply the combos. Um, Thankfully, I started to get the idea of what it was. Yeah, and the instances where he did want something separated, he used two dashes. Or they, she. She have any other works? Something from last year, On Safari in Rillier and Carcosa with gun and camera. An academic's whimsical decision to take a DNA test leads her into uncharted territory, where she discovers some extraordinary truths about herself and new possibilities for her future. He's also got Deriving Life, The Stone in the Skull, Karen Memory. Karen? Karens? This Chance Planet, Steels of the Sky excerpt, Book of Iron, Faster Gun, The Sea of Thy Mistress. Yeah, she's been working on stuff for a while. Nice. Doing some good writings. All right. So we have a couple of options here. Would you guys like to hear the story of Small Monsters, the story of Across Dark Water, Across the Dark Water by Richard Kadri? This one is Small Monsters by E. Lily Yu, or The Tiger by Tegan Moore. I'll read the little blurbs about him. Uh, Small Monsters is Uh, all its life, a small monster with emerald scales has been a source of never ending food to larger and more powerful creatures who feast on the small monster's limbs each time one regrows. This is the story of how the small monster meets an industrious artist and reforms into something or into someone new, someone who can't be eaten. This one does have a content warning. Across the dark waters, an uncontrollable plague has left the city in ruins and trapped in perpetual quarantine. A thief hires a guide to lead him safely through the city's many dangers to the one person who can give him the travel papers he needs to escape. The Tiger. The path through time is Jules' favorite part of the museum, a marvelous exhibit that brings the past to life, from the present all the way back to the prehistoric. Tonight, at his aunt's wedding reception, as Jules walks along the path, it comes alive like never before. Got kind of a night at the museum uh, deal here. Across Dark Waters is a trip through a post apocalyptic uh, cityscape, I think. And yeah, small monsters could be pretty cool. I do love the art for it. All right, we will stop the volcano ambiance. For small monsters, I honestly don't know what ambiance would be best to use. It says that they're in a den, perhaps just like a forest ambiance, or like fields. A marsh, perhaps? Yeah, this one might be the one to go with. All right. And we will read Small Monsters next. All right. This is Small Monsters by E. Lily Yu. Content warning for fictional depictions of physical and emotional abuse. The small monster, whelped, slipped out of its call and onto the pebbly floor of the den. Its emerald scales flexed, its soft tail swept the earth. The small monster stretched out its new limbs, shuddering. It smelled raw white roots and mud and dried ichor. The den was an egg-shaped void under a hill. A roof of rocks and matted roots hid the small soft monster and its parent from the moon's white gaze. The small monster unstuck each gluey eye and saw the ruby scales of its parent, whose side heaved with long and labored breaths. The birthing of monsters is hungry work, a labor of a week or more. And as the small monster looked up upon the world, still damp from birth, its parent lowered its great golden beak and bit off a tender limb. Humming with relief and satisfaction, the parent shifted its gleaming bulk to the rear of the den and settled down to sleep. The small monster bled and bled and wailed. Like gecko tails and starfish arms, the small monster's lost limbs scabbed, healed, and regrew. Its parent left the den and returned with bloodied lumps of deer, bear, rabbit, and hawk. Over time, the small monster sprouted 2 rows of serried teeth, 6 hard, rigid horns, and stubby claws. Occasionally, the gold-beaked monster did not return to the den for days, finally dragging in a much-mauled haunch of deer. Sometimes it returned without anything at all. Those mornings, when the small monster felt its parents' footfalls through the packed earth, it fled cowering to the steep, curved back of the den, though that was, of course, no hiding place at all. And by noon, the small monster would be diminished by a leg or a tail or a bite from its side, too wise and afraid now, as its parents slept, to make a sound. Though beak, fang, and claw speak more directly, the monsters have their own harsh and sibilant language. Now and then the parent spoke, either to itself or in challenge to another monster whose shadow crossed the mouth of the den. And syllable by hiss, the small monster learned. One morning, after they had devoured the remnants of a mountain lion, the small monster spoke. "Why do you eat me?" it said. Its parent lolled onto one side, spines bristling. Gobbets of meat warmed its belly and weighed it down, and it felt pleasant toward the world and its whelp. "Because I am hungry." "But why not eat?" The monster took a breath. "Your own leg." "Silly, I am your parent. I birthed you. You are mine." "But it hurts." "It grows back." And neither said a word more. In time, the parent waxed gibbous like the moon, growing too ponderous to hunt. It tore off and ate all 4 of the small monster's limbs over the course of a week, writhing and hissing as it did so, without the slightest sign of enjoyment. At the end of the week, another, smaller monster was expelled in a pool of foul-smelling birth fluid, and the den rang with 3 cries of pain, snappishness, and distress. After that, the small monster learned the trick of being farthest from the den's entrance when their parent returned unfed. It was not as helpless as the smallest monster, and so on most occasions, apart from ill-timed naps, the matter was decided in the small monster's favor. The snapping, crunching, and sobbing were terrible to hear. The small monster quickly learned not to listen. While its parent haunted, the small monster played. In the evenings, starlight washed the opening of the den. The small monster rushed up to the brink of a world that smelled like wilderness and pine forest, from which the small and smallest monsters were both forbidden, then backed away. "When can I go out?" the small monster had asked. "Never," came the reply. "You will remain here always, with me." While it was not brave enough to disobey, the small monster was clever enough to consider one claw within the den a perfect observance of the law. Now a damp wind blew over the small monster, smelling of blackberries and yellow-poured bullets. Nightbirds hooted and sawed in the trees. Deep in the den, the smallest monster whimpered in its sleep. Something slunk, lithe and stealthy, through the red-berried brush. It sounded larger than the foxes the smallest had seen, less twitchy than the rabbits and foxes hunted. The unseen thing paced back and forth, whuffing, and the small monster went as still as stone. It was too late. A step, a spring, and then 3 slitted yellow eyes looked down upon the small monster. Where the gold-beaked monster was clad in ruby scales. This monster was all tawny, wiry fur. "Poor thing," it said. "Who ate your leg?" For the small monster had been unlucky not long ago, though the stump had scabbed. "Parent," said the small monster, "but it grows back." "I remember being small," the tawny thing said. "Every month, the tearing teeth. Every week," the small monster said. "If you came with me," the tawny thing said, "I would not bite you more than once a month, and only if I had to." This sounded like heaven to the small monster. It quivered its horns and clattered its scales. Then it paused. "I can't run as fast as you," it said, "with only 3 legs." "No matter," the tawny thing said, lowering its head. It mouthed the small monster like a cat with a kitten. Then it tensed its muscles and bounded into the forest. Its great paws struck the earth with such force that the small monster's teeth clicked against each other. Trees rushed past them, dark and blurred. By the time they stopped, the stars had dimmed and sunk into dawn. The forest was gone, and the world smelled anew. They were a long way from the den beneath the hill where the smallest monster waited alone. The tawny thing had scented something. Its 3 yellow eyes grew black and wide. It dropped the small monster and hove? That's a typo. It dropped the small monster and dove into the wheat fields, shivering around them. The long stalks pale under the rosy sky. From the far side of the field came a stifled shout. A few minutes later, the wheat parted, and the tawny thing dragged out the body of a man. His throat was open, wet, and red. His old, patched clothes ripped easily. They ate, the steam from the man's entrails wreathing them. The small monster gnawed on knuckles and spat out little finger bones. The tawny thing crunched the femurs for their marrow. They licked themselves clean of the sweet blood, then went on. Around them, plains billowed and shook loose their folds of gold. The tawny thing and the small monster did not converse. Their pace was leisurely at first, while the small monster hopped and hobbled on the 3 legs. The tawny thing often carried it. After its 4th leg budded and regrew, though the limb was soft and tender for a time, the small monster kept up as well as it could. The tawny thing was swift and lethal, and for a long time, as the moon filled and emptied and filled, the small monster kept all its limbs and ate well. It learned to catch crickets while the tawny thing hunted. Then one too many deer slipped the tawny thing's jaws. It did not particularly matter why. An old injury in one whip-muscled leg might have flared, or perhaps the canines of all living beings in autumn had pricked the velvet ears of the deer. Whatever the reason, balked of its prey, the tawny thing brittled and gnashed its teeth. It returned to where the small monster was pouncing at insects. When the small monster felt the earth shudder, it leapt up to flee, but too slowly. A moment later, it was lying in its own green ichor, keening. The tawny thing said, astonished, "You are delicious." The small monster moaned. Bones cracked. Emerald scales dropped like leaves. The tawny thing swallowed what had been the small monster's foreleg, snuffled, and curled up to sleep. "You can still walk on 3 legs," the tawny thing said, yawning. 2 of its yellow eyes shut. The 3rd watched the small monster. From then on, the tawny thing ate of the small monster regularly, finding itself partial to the taste. For fairness, even the small monster admitted this. It took care to leave the small monster with 3 legs to walk on, though not always a fine and lashing tail. Bit by bit by bite, though, even that changed. The tawny thing hunted less frequently. More and more, its 3 eyes settled upon the small monster, who shrank from the hunger glowing there. Before long, the eating was more than monthly. There was nothing the small monster could do about it, besides weeping and raging as the tawny thing slept. With 2 legs, it could go no distance at all. "No good," said a razor bird in the tree above them. It lashed its 3 barbed tails and craned its neck. "Better to eat you all at once. Less moaning, less waste." "Is that what you'll do?" the small monster said, baring its teeth through its tears. "Only if you want," the razor bird said. "No, thank you," the small monster said. "Or if you like, I could carry you away. For one of your legs and your talkative tongue. For you are heavy, and the way is long, and my wings will tire." "You'll take me to your nest to feed your own small monsters." The razor bird laughed a red, raspy laugh. "A good idea. If I had them, I would. But I mean a fair bargain." "Where would you take me?" "There is a hollow tree in a distant wood where no monsters go, wormy with beetle grubs and wet with rain. I will leave you there for a leg and a tongue." "They're yours," the small monster said, resigned. Faster than that, the razor bird stooped from the tree, and its claws closed on the small monster. The tawny thing slept, mumbling on, even as the small monster's stumps spotted its pelt with ichor. "Have to do something about that," the razor bird said. It spread its wings wider than any eagle's, wide enough to blot out the moon. They flew far until they reached a glacier-fed lake. There, the razor bird dropped the small monster in. Several times it snatched up and dropped the small monster, until the small monster was half drowned, but no longer bleeding. "There," said the razor bird. "Let's see them track you now." Mountains passed beneath them, then rivers and woods. Stars glistened icily above them. A 2-tailed comet shone in the sky. But the small monster was too cold to notice, hanging mute and miserable from the razor bird's claws. The wild flight ended with an angled descent through the canopy of an old beech wood. They landed upon a bare white snag. "There," the razor bird said, its crimson eyes bright. "Now open your mouth." Payment was settled with merciful swiftness. When that was finished, the razor bird lowered the monster into the snag's hollow heart, which was barely big enough for its remaining limbs. The wood had gone spongy with insects and rot. "Mind you," the razor bird said, "I am what I am. I know where you are. If I hatch chicks, I'll look where I stashed you. Don't hide here too long." It flicked its 3 tails and soared away. The snag was far from comfortable. When it rained, the monster licked at the trickles and ran down the wood and drank from the puddle that formed at its feet. For food, it had watery white wriggling grubs. Watery white wriggling grubs. On a day it remembered even after with pleasure, it caught and ate an incautious squirrel. On that diet, more fit for woodpeckers, the small monster's lost limbs returned with painful slowness. Its plump sides slumped, and its glossy scales dulled. But there were no severing teeth or beaks in the snag, apart from its own. Bud by bone, claws and tail and all, the small monster grew into itself again. When all its pieces were present, the small monster clambered out of the snag and fell snout first into the grass. When it had warmed itself in the sun a while, motionless as moss, it caught a vole by surprise and devoured it, as well as the beetle the vole had been nibbling on. Then the razor bird's parting words came to mind. The small monster shuddered and headed in the direction of the snag's shadow. It snapped at grasshoppers as it went. Now and then, the small monster crouched behind a tree as something larger snorted and shuffled in the brush. Once, it froze under a whirl of ferns as the three-tailed shadow of a bird passed over. The small monster liked its legs and tail, and it wanted no more of monstrous bargains. As it scrambled and slid down a slope of scree, the small monster chanced upon a gashed and broken thing. Deep gouges in its side showed the white of bone. Its pointed snout lolled in a pool of gore. One scratched silver eye opened. "Please," the rat-nosed thing said, "come closer." The small monster sat back on its haunches and sized up the battered bulk of the thing. Among the feathery grasses at the bottom of the slope, it caught a speckled frog, which it brought back and dropped near, but not too near, the creature's snout. The rat-nosed thing licked up the frog and swallowed it, then shut its eyes. Its breathing was shallow. In the meadows around them, the small monster searched for slithering, skittering creatures. Garter snakes and earthworms, thrush eggs and wrens, to feed both itself and the broken monster. Time trickled past, and the wounds on the rat-nosed thing scabbed. Its scarred eyes followed the small monster. One day, as the small monster left a lizard by its snout, the rat-nosed thing lunged. "Why?" the small monster cried, scrabbling backward, bleeding. The rat-nosed thing made wet, happy noises. "Better than worms and slugs and grubs." Flinching with pain, the small monster fled. Behind it, claws scraped stone as the rat-nosed thing stood. It snuffed to the ground and chuckled like boulders breaking. At this, the small monster turned and saw that its own dribbling ichor had painted a path. Down that path, snout to earth, the rat-nosed thing hunted. The small monster lashed its tail, though the wound in its side was a white, hot knife. It scaled the nearest fire and crept out upon the bow. And as the rat-nosed thing came sniffing beneath, the small monster let go and fell. Its claws clamped onto the pursuer's skull, and as the rat-nosed thing swung its head and shrilled, the small monster bit out one silver eye and slit the jelly of the other. Then it leapt down and tore at the taut, thin skin where the rat-nosed thing's wounds had barely healed. The small monster scratched until the tender flesh parted and showed again the stark white bones. It bit and squirmed into the rat-nosed thing, crawling inside the warm, plush cage of its ribs. The small monster ate what it found there. Bitter, bilious, savory, sweet. When it had swallowed most of the rat-nosed thing, enough to push apart the ribs and emerge, there was a new sharpness to its face, and a silver tinge to its scales. It kicked a scatter of gravel over the raw red bones and prowled on, weary but unafraid. A strange scent blew across the small monster's way, one it had never smelt before, and it turned and went into the wind. Days and nights it chased the scent, through forest and scrub, until over salt marsh and fen, until the small monster stood at the edge of the sea. Brown waves roared like dragons along the shore. The small monster lowered its head to drink, and found that the water was bitter and burned. "I see," the small monster said. "This is the end of the world." It crouched in the surf and stared at the sharp, straight limit of the sea. After a while, it noticed a little clawed creature beside it, no bigger than one of the small monster's teeth. Its tiny claws worked upon a shard of sea glass. "What are you doing?" the small monster said. "Adding to you," the clawed creature said. "Not that you aren't already excellent, but anyone can be improved." Several flowery tufts sprouted from the creature's shell. Every now and then the creature tickled one of them and applied an invisibly slight secretion to the sea glass it was pressing against the small monster's scale. At length, it rested, sighing in satisfaction. "Ah," it said. "Art." "Sorry?" "Do forgive me. What I should ask is, do you like what I've done?" The small monster studied the addition to its side. "You disapprove. I can remove it," the clawed creature said. It reached for the shard. "Don't." "Then will you let me add more?" "If that's what you want," the small monster said. The tide whisked in, rolling a fat seal onto the shore. The small monster took a few neat bites, then offered some to the laboring creature. In a minute, in a minute." By the time the tide whispered out, the small monster had been adorned with 6 chips of sea glass, blue and brown. "Now I have earned my supper," the clawed creature declared, extending its pincers to receive a morsel of seal. It ate with sounds of satisfaction. Every so often, it passed a crumb to the tufts on its back, which grasped hungrily at the flecks of food. "Who are they? What are they?" the small monster asked. "Anemones," the clawed creature said. "Some of the sea's most stinging critics. They keep me honest, and they produce a good glue." A seagull stooped at the seal carcass. The small monster broke its neck with a blow. Wish I could do that, the clawed creature said. Eat, the small monster said. You'll be big enough one day. When the small monster was thirsty, it went inland for water. When it was hungry, it dove for fish and seals. But most of the time, it sat still and watched, puzzled as the clawed creature embellished its scales. Gradually, the small monster's gleaming green mail was encased in glass, agate, and mother of pearl. Beautiful, the clawed creature said. Sunlight glowed in the small monster's new shell. Exquisite, exceptional, if I do say so myself. The anemones waved their fronds in a lazy assent. Are you done? The small monster said. For a moment, beauty must be appreciated. And then... It's not over? Never. Life is growth. Art must follow. Why, I myself have shed 2 shells since I started this work. But for the present, I shall scuttle along the beach and search for my next stroke of inspiration. The small monster did not understand much of what its companion said. Nevertheless, it escorted the clawed creature on its muttering constitutionals, waiting as a striped pebble or shapely stick held it wrapped. Any seagull that swooped, thinking it had found an inattentive meal, died in a spray of bloody feathers. The clawed creature hardly noticed. Sometimes it crept up the small monster's flank, perched upon a horn, and confessed its doubts. What if it never comes? The next idea. What then? What if my great works lie behind me? The small monster made reassuring noises, but did not know what else to do, for its life had been biting and bleeding, not art. One night, the wind rose. The air prickled and itched. Lightning cracked the violet sky. In one sheeting flash, the small monster thought it saw a forest upon the sea. I have it! The clawed creature shouted into the small monster's ear. Quick, swim! The small monster plunged into the ocean, though towering waves spun and flung them about. Once they dove deep, the water gentled. Soon they reached the broad black hull of the ship, whose masts had looked like trees from the shore. Wait, the clawed creature said, clinging to the monster. They did not wait long. A wave tossed the ship and smashed it down, clean as a walnut. The hull split into halves. Small bodies tumbled out of it, as well as timbers and chests and drowning sheep. Here and there a broken chest poured a glittering of gold. That, the clawed creature said. I want that. The small monster surfaced, gasped, and dove again. It caught 4 coins in its claws, and 1 in its teeth, marked where the rest sank into darkness. And swam back to shore. Rain lanced down as the small monster hauled itself out of the water. I hope they're worth it, the small monster said. They will be, the clawed creature said. You'll see. They huddled together under a dripping pine, until the storm blew itself to shreds. A sickly dawn shone in the sky. Pieces of the ship started drifting ashore, as did a fine banquet of brined sailor and sheep. "I suppose you want more of those round objects," the small monster said. The clawed creature said, "If you don't mind." Day after day, by dint of much swimming, the small monster amassed a heap of gold. "What now?" the small monster said. "Now I work." Though each golden coin was as large as its body, and so heavy it asked the small monster to hold them in place, the clawed creature labored without rest or food. Every so often, the small monster tried to coax it into eating. "The art is all. The art is all," the clawed creature said, wrestling with its piece of gold. Over the small monster's shell of glass and nacre, which had split and been mended as the small monster grew. The clawed creature affixed escudo and pistol. Sunlight danced on their faces and shook bright sequins across the sand. "There," the clawed creature said. "Magnificent. You're a treasure, worth your weight in gold." Stretching, the small monster heard its golden scales clink. "Let them bite me now. Let them bite me now," it said. "Eh? Pass the fish." After a day or two of dazzlement, in which the small monster flung sunlight every which way, briefly blinding a number of birds, at the clawed creature's insistence, it covered itself in seaweed until not a glint of golden armor could be seen. "More prudent that way," the clawed creature said. The small monster ate, grew, fetched whatever shell or skull the clawed creature desired, and watched the ebb and flow of the tide. Despite gusts, gales, storms, and heavy waves that stretch off, and heaving waves, that stretch of seashore was the most peaceful place the monster had ever known. It mentioned as much to the clawed creature. "Nothing lasts," the clawed creature said, as it placed stones in a pleasing pattern on the sand. "Neither good nor bad." All right, Doggo has quieted down. "Neither good nor bad, but one must always enjoy the good." That piece ended abruptly on a clear afternoon. The wind was crisp and blowing off the sea. The sigh of the waves curling in and out hid for a time the sounds of approach. The clawed creature was carving a sand dollar into layers of lace, and the small monster, admiring, did not hear. Only when sand trickled in rivulets down the dune above them did the small monster lift its eyes and see. Another monster crouched at the top of the dune. It also boasted a crown of horns, though its sides were stippled with ruby spots. "Uh-oh," the clawed creature said. "Excuse me?" "Oh, excuse me." It tucked itself into its shell. The next wave that foamed in carried it off. "What do you want?" the small monster asked. "You? Do I know you?" the small monster said. Then it shook itself from horns to tail in surprise, for it recognized the monster. "As well as your own blood." "Oh, as well as your own blood," the smallest monster said. "I've tracked you through mountains and forests and fields, and now I shall eat you." "Why?" "You owe me." The smallest monster dug its red claws into the soft white side of the dune. Then it sprang. The small monster turned sideways, and its sibling crashed into its seaweed-draped mail. Claws clacked on gold, a fang shattered. The smallest monster rolled and rose, snarling. "If you're hungry," the small monster said, "these waters have squid and dogfish in them." "Not here for fish," its sibling said. The small monster met the next charge with one glass and gold shoulder. "No." Shoot, okay. Well, I'm gonna make a bookmark for where we're at in this little tale, and we'll return next time to see if the smallest monster can truly take on the small one. The sibling monsters duke it out next time on Merry Mitch. Hang on, let me pause the ambiance and get the outro music a rolling. All right, hey guys, remember to take the merriment that we found here together today. Know that if you feel like a small monster, in time you will grow and you will become something that can better bear the pain. Take that merriment, guys. Let it set you at ease as you go into the rest of your day today, and let it carry you into tomorrow. Remember, with each thing we lose, with each bout of pain we grow. I've been Merry Mitch. Till next time, much love, guys, and enjoy the rest of the program.